Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1.
The thinking atheist. It's not a person. It's a symbol. An idea.
The population of atheists in this country is going through the roof.
Rejecting faith. Pursuing knowledge. Challenging the sacred.
If I tell the truth, it's because I tell the truth. Not because I put my hand on a book and made a wish.
And working together for a more rational world.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way.
Assume nothing. Question everything. And start thinking. This is the Thinking Atheist Podcast. Hosted by Seth Andrews.
So my wife has been telling her friends in conversations, they're talking about something else or texting about something else, and she'll just sort of smirk at me and then interject this. She'll say, hey, by the way, if anything sketchy ever happens to me, I disappear mysteriously or they find my body in a ditch, I want you to tell the police that the first person they should look at is my husband, because I'm a little nervous about the man. And here's where that comes from. I'm a true crime addict. I know a lot of it is trash television. I know that sometimes they embellish or fill in blanks with fiction or ramp up the drama unnecessarily. I know that sometimes true crime is not always true. I'm also fully aware of the CSI effect. And this deals with our expectations. The general public, weaned on crime television, we have this sort of mental picture of how the process is supposed to go. Now, if you don't know what the CSI effect is, CSI is a television crime show that released in October of 2000 on CBS. This show blasted out of the ratings gate and dominated television. Everybody was watching it. Everybody was talking about it. And it's the type of TV forensic cop crime show that you would expect. Week after week, suspiciously attractive investigators are using fancy forensic techniques to solve mostly murder cases. What happens in TV crime? The investigators outsmart the criminals, and things are usually solved in short order. The public perception then is that forensics is swift and clean and one and done, and there's always going to be a smoking gun. Forensics itself is nothing new. We like to think that forensic examinations are novel and recent, but I mean, as long as there have been crime scenes, people have investigated crime scenes. I'm reminded of this famous story, forgive the digression, but it's interesting. The story from like 2,000 years ago about the Greek tyrant of Syracuse, a guy named Hero II. He was not a good guy. He was very vain, and he wanted a gold crown made for himself. And so he hired a goldsmith. He gave him the raw material, the pure gold, and he said, fashion me an amazing, beautiful, holy crown. And when the goldsmith delivered it, Hero II looked at it and he was suspicious, and he thought, hey, wait a minute. What are the chances that this guy took some of the gold for himself secretly, and then he blended some other metals, not as valuable, into the crown, easily disguised? It was still gold in color. It still looked like gold, but not 100%. And then the goldsmith just sort of filled his own pockets, hoping nobody would notice. How was Hero II going to know the difference? Well, he brought in the famous Greek mathematician and physicist Archimedes. And he said, I want you to figure this out. Is it pure gold or is the guy ripping me off? Archimedes was not allowed to take the crown apart or damage it or even scratch it, right? This was a holy object that had been dedicated to the gods. How does he examine it without disturbing it? And according to our history books, one day he was sitting in the bathtub And he noticed that the more his body sank in the tub, the more water spilled out over the edges. And he apparently had an epiphany in that moment, and he jumped up, stark naked, and he yelled, "Eureka! Eureka!" And he ran out and put together this experiment. He had the crown, and then he had two masses of metal that were the very same weight. He had the crown, then gold, a mass of gold, then a mass of silver. And he took a large vessel, filled it up to right at the brim with water. He took the mass of silver and he dropped it into the water, and then he measured how much water spilled out. Then he filled it back up and he grabbed the mass of gold. He dropped the gold in, but not as much water spilled out because gold is more dense than silver, meaning that even if it weighs the same, it will take up less volume. After that, he grabbed the crown, he dropped it into the full vessel of water, and he measured, and lo and behold, more water than should have been displaced by gold, pure gold, spilled out. He had proven that the goldsmith had snuck in some cheaper metals into the crown and apparently kept some of the gold for himself. Well, what is that if not forensics? Fascinating story. The Qin dynasty, China, more than 2,000 years ago, they were filing autopsy reports. And the reason we know this is because archaeologists have discovered them. Worldwide, by the early part of the 19th century, police started to examine hair and fingerprints and blood more closely. Guns were becoming more popular, and so ballistics, forensics, sort of evolved with them. The 20th century saw us unlocking the mysteries of the human genome. Before you know it, we've got computers getting into the game. The first court case, a murder case involving DNA evidence, happened in 1987. There was a guy accused of killing somebody else. They put him on trial. They took a DNA sample and they compared it with the DNA of 5,000 other people. And this guy was cleared. The accused was exonerated, and beyond that, the DNA evidence implicated and ultimately convicted somebody else. The FBI would have a full DNA database starting in 1998, and of course, we talk about genetic testing all the time today. Crime scene investigation, the CSI effect. We think, we expect, hey, somebody sweep up the fibers and check the fabrics and look for the prints and test the secretions and whatever. And you will find the killer. And if you don't, it's your fault. But of course, this is not how things go down in the real world. I'm not saying that there aren't mistakes, inefficiencies, bureaucracy, laziness, oversights, corruption, or just incompetence. I'm not saying that we won't find examples of people being like this, because you'll find it in any situation where human beings are involved. But even when the pros are professional and the process is working as it should, our expectations can be really unrealistic. We're thinking we're going to get CSI, CSI Vegas, CSI New York, CSI Miami, or whatever fast and flashy crime drama we've been binging for the last 2 weeks. And this is the case even with true crime shows, like The First 48. And the idea there is that most cases are blown wide open and the killers are discovered and arrested within the first 48 hours. You got 2 days, and after that, then things go cold and most criminals will get away with it. So whatever you're going to find, whoever you're going to find, you got to do it in the first 48 hours or you're hosed. So now you got the general public developing unrealistic expectations while they've been watching The Real. I have a confession. I'm a sucker for a show on HLN called Forensic Files. This is an older show. It started back in the 1990s, narrated by one of my favorite voices in all of broadcasting, a guy named Peter Thomas. He passed away some years ago, but I just love his voice. So authoritative and professional and compelling. I'd watch Forensic Files just to listen to Peter Thomas. But I will sit in front of the television for show after show. Each episode is about 23 minutes, and they just loop on HLN. I will be at a convention. After a long day at the event, I will go back and decompress in the hotel room, binging Forensic Files until I finally fall asleep. And, of course, I watch this show at home. So Natalie and I are sitting there, and she's passively listening to whatever crime is being portrayed on screen. She's reading, or she's scrolling her phone, or just kind of resting with the dogs. And I am locked on to the murder mystery, the forensic evidence discovered and examined. The imprint of the killer's shoe. It was a size 11.5 combat boot, a specific make. Not very many of those in the United States. I wonder where this was purchased. There's a fingerprint belonging to somebody who did not live in that house. They scrape out some skin cells from underneath the stepmother's fingernails. There's blood spatter in the back of the creepy white serial killer van. Arson investigators find out that there was accelerant next to the victim, who burned to death in what was supposed to be an electrical fire. This is the whole vibe of Forensic Files, and I'm sitting there watching. And as I'm watching, the gears in my head are turning. The criminals are getting caught because they made mistakes, or they had a bad method, or they just left a trail unnecessarily. So as I'm watching, I'm thinking, well, I could do that better. I wouldn't make that mistake. Here's my method. Here's how I would get away with it. And then I articulate these thoughts to my wife. And Natalie says, "Who thinks like that? Is there something you want to tell me? Have you been living a double life? Are you secretly a serial killer? Because that's information that I would sure like to have." And I always smile and go, "Baby, you're safe. I'm good. I'm a lover. I'm not a fighter. I'd never hurt anybody. I'm just saying, if I was a criminal, I could do a hell of a lot better than old Buster Butt Scratch, who lives in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, who buried the murder weapon out in his yard next to the hot tub." That's all I'm saying, okay? I could do better. Natalie says, "All right, fine. If you were going to murder me, how would you get away with it?" Now, I'm not taking this bait. Yeah, I'm not taking that bait. I'm smarter than that. I said, "Baby, I'd never murder you. I am safe people." And then she says, "Okay, fine, it's not me. If you murdered somebody else, how would you get away with it?" And I'm still qualifying, right? Well, this is just hypothetical. We're just talking. Nothing here has anything to do with who I am as a human being. I am an agent of healing, not harm. I'm just overcompensating. Having said that, here are a few things I would do to get away with murder. And as her face remains totally blank, I start to lay out my evil plan. And I say, first of all, fibers. Fibers are always a problem at crime scenes. Clothing, you got your shirt and your pants, your socks, whatever. It's always fibers falling out. Then there are skin cells, which might be shed somewhere. That's potential DNA evidence. Hair falling out of my head that may incriminate me. Fingerprints I inadvertently leave on a doorknob or a shelf or a table, or even the victim. That's a problem. So here's how I would create a protective shield to keep any of me from remaining at the scene. I would encase myself in saran wrap. And then I would dig out eye holes and put on goggles and maybe put on some kind of a mask, a gas mask, or one of those N95 masks, medical masks for breathing. So I'm not exhaling any implicating genetic evidence onto the scene. I'm totally covered up and I'm moving fast, so I don't have to worry about overheating, but I am totally wrapped in plastic wrap. Natalie is processing that visual. She's envisioning her husband totally saran wrapped, about to enter the crime scene, but she is still listening. And then I say this: shoe prints. How many times has a killer left imprints, even on concrete or tile? Certainly if they go out and step in the dirt or mud, that's just dumb. I would invent a solution for that. Now, I wear a size 14 shoe. I would mount a shoe underneath the shoe. Not stilts, but just a few inches under my size 14 sole would be a smaller sole that would eliminate me as a suspect, and I would practice walking around in these sort of manufactured shoes over shoes. I would get really good at my movements so that I wouldn't tip over and give myself away. Now, the cops are looking for a size 10 and not a size 14. I think that's clever. My wife is getting increasingly uncomfortable. If I had better judgment, I might listen to it, but I continue anyway. I'm right-handed. I would practice doing everything left-handed, so it looks totally organic and natural. Then they might be looking for a left-hander. That seems prudent. If I was doing a tandem crime with somebody else, we would speak in a different language, something other than English, because I only speak English. So if they're looking for someone who speaks a different language, that might rule me out as well. And this is something we could practice, certain words that we harvested and had ready. Of course, my first thought was, well, what's the second most popular language in the United States? It's going to be Spanish. And I thought at first, well, that would really increase the suspect pool beyond me or make it harder to pin me down. Natalie brought up this, and she's absolutely right. She's like, oh, great. You will potentially implicate someone else, and you will add to the stereotype of the immigrant criminal in the United States. And I had to give her that one. And then I thought, well, wait a minute. I'm already a killer. I have no moral center anyway. What do I care what stereotype I perpetrate? But okay, fine. I take her point. And then I think, well, how about a different, more obscure language from across the ocean? The man caught on security video was speaking Belarusian. Do I think that detectives are going to hop on a plane, go to Belarus, and start knocking on doors to ask questions? I do not. Another language seems prudent. I would not keep, certainly I wouldn't park in my driveway, the evil, scary, painter's white 1977 serial killer van. How many people keep driving around with the car they used to perpetrate the crimes? I would paint it and sell it. I would maybe dig a huge hole in a field and just bury the whole thing. I certainly wouldn't be driving around town where a cop could pull me over for a routine stop. You got an expired tag or a taillight is out. By the way, can you open the back doors of the van and let me take an inspection? Holy shit. Why do you have a human body-sized freezer that has blood stains on it? Now, this seems easily avoided. I'm just saying. And then I finish with an idea that I admit is totally dark, but it has always bugged me. Why do killers leave the body where it is quickly and easily discovered? I think the whole point is as little evidence as possible. Why drop it in the river so it washes up on shore? Why just stick it under a few leaves and branches? It'll be found immediately. If you bury it, why only bury it 18 inches? You're at the mercy of the next big rain. No, what I would do, and I got this idea from somebody on my own Facebook page, so I'm not the only one who thinks like this. I would use a post hole digger, something that digs vertically, and I would dig way down to about 15 feet, and I would bury the body vertically. I would fill the hole up to a certain height, and then I would add some rock near where the natural rock table would be. And then, I don't know, a couple of feet under the surface, I would put roadkill, probably a dog. I'm not going to kill a dog. I'm not a monster, right? I'm not going to kill a dog. But unfortunately, in our world, there are dogs who are hit by cars and whatever. So I would find one and I would bury it maybe 2 feet under the actual surface of the ground. So the search party's out. Everybody's doing the grid. They've got the cadaver dogs. Hey, they get a hit. The ground is dug up. There's a dog that has been decomposing. False positive. They check that spot off their list and they go away. I've been working it out in my brain. That seems like it might work. Now, since that day, since that conversation, my wife has not looked at me the same way. She's like, you have a dark side. Something wrong with you. Who thinks like this? And I told her, honey, I don't care how sweet and kind and cherub-faced and wonderful you are, you have a dark side. I'm convinced every human being has a dark dungeon in the back of their skull somewhere. I don't care who you are. I don't care how many protests you hear from people who say their thoughts only consist of happy, happy, joy, joy, lifetime movie, harps and confetti and gold light. I don't care how many people tell you that. They're lying. I'm convinced everybody has a dark side. And I have been reading some research on this, that having a dark side is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it might be healthy. Oh, we got to talk about this. I'm going to share more about what I have been reading on humanity's dark side next. We're talking about the dark side, the dark shade of human nature. Do we all have that dark side? I'll make a confession, since I've been talking about my own thoughts, mostly because I want you to feel safe to have those thoughts as well, or at least to entertain what they are, to understand why they exist. And so fine, I'll put myself out there and I will share a specific from my past. It was one of my first radio jobs. I was in my early 20s. Granted, I was kind of a hot-tempered, piss and vinegar, young 20-something. So I was pretty ramped up. But I had a boss at a Christian station, the owner of that business, one of the worst people I have ever met. It is rare in my life that I use the word hate. I mean, I talk all the time about how we want to defeat hate on this planet. Maybe you are like me, desperate to find some redemption, some redeeming quality in everybody or almost everybody. I am telling you, this guy was just poison. Insecure, temperamental, demeaning. He would just walk in. He's one of those guys when he would walk in the room. And when he walked in the building, the temperature cooled. Everybody got tense. Speaking voices turned into whispers, and everybody was like, is he here? Is he still here? Has he left? Does anybody know when he's going to leave? Because we couldn't wait for him to leave. His presence meant that at any moment, he might turn the corner, walk into your room, and make you feel like shit. Just destroy you verbally, and then remind you that because he wrote the checks and he determined who got hired and fired, he essentially held your destiny, your job, maybe even your career and future in his hands, and having made that proclamation and firmly put you in your place, he would turn and waltz out the door, conscience free. I hated that man. And I fantasized. One day he'd walk in the room, dress me down, make me feel like shit, just go off, and I'd let him finish, and then I would throw him through plate glass. I think we've all had those moments where we say, it's a good thing for you I'm civilized. A man named Dr. Leon Seltzer. He has a doctorate in both English and psychology, former professor at Queens College in Cleveland State. He's written several books on psychology, and he writes the Evolution of the Self blog. And he has this article, Just How Dark is Your Dark Side? Dr. Seltzer says this: when we talk about having a dark side, we're generally calling attention to our most aggressive or lustful, antisocial instincts, or the mean-spirited, bloodthirsty belligerents presumably lurking deep within us, or our acting out impulses that would disrupt others' lives, if not outright decimate them. Rape, mutilation, murder, unconscionable acts of thievery, betrayal, treachery, sadism, masochism, unbounded greed, incest, and so on. But what I'd like to suggest here is that perhaps your darkest fantasies shouldn't be understood as all that demonic, or at least they can be much more compassionately appreciated as audacious, disinhibited, primitive, grandiose, or hedonistic, as opposed to, say, degrading, disgraceful, or nefarious. Freud, in his classic Civilization and Its Discontents, 1929, postulated that being part of a civilized society safeguards us from personal chaos, from being dominated by our moral id. So, as civilized beings, we appoint communal authorities, like police, to protect us not simply from others' baser impulses, but also our own. Yet to Freud, this necessary protection also culminates in our discontent, for we're thereby required to subdue our pleasure-seeking instinctual drives. To live harmoniously with others, we must subdue our otherwise impetuous desires. I believe most people would agree that, although it's somewhat reductive, there's something profoundly true in Freud's assumptions about the human psyche. At the same time, I think that while we may be wired to at least imagine what it might be like to boldly and unabashedly follow our inborn predilections and without the slightest regard for how they might affect others, just envisioning ourselves engaging in such behaviors hardly means that finally we'd choose to enact them. After all, in so many ways, we need literally to rely on others for survival. Additionally, we're a gregarious species, and so wouldn't want to do things that might offend others and alienate them from us, though we might not be able to resist fantasizing various acts that might enable us to freely pursue our altogether personal pleasure principle. The overwhelming majority of us are strongly motivated to restrain ourselves from actually carrying out such clearly sociopathic behaviors. Given these natural internal constraints, we need to question whether our dark side is ultimately all that dark. That is, we're generally cognizant that whatever fantasies we may have of power, revenge, conquest, or reckless expression of libido are just that, fantasies. But by permitting ourselves to at least daydream about them, we can afford ourselves some kind of compensatory gratification. At a safe remove from reality, we can offer ourselves the alternative of imagining what, in actuality, we wouldn't really choose to do, or for that matter, be. And in that sense, our dark side can be seen as, well, rather innocent. Permitting it to surface in daydreams represents a measured indulgence, offering us an escape from the pro-social behavior that almost all of us regularly elect to participate in. For we do want and need to keep our social ties safe and secure. And though we may have a competitive streak in us, we also place a high value on interpersonal cooperation. So voluntarily, we monitor our impulses and we take care to keep them in check. And as a respite from all our self-discipline and forbearance, we periodically permit ourselves to fabricate a world in which our desires, however outrageous or antisocial, might nonetheless reign supreme. Given that our dark side embodies our more primitive, pleasure or power-seeking instincts, must we zealously avoid disclosing it or reject it as despicable, something other than respectably human, and therefore to be shunned and repudiated? In the end, such dark predictions really can't be seen as intrinsically culpable, in that most of them merely represent appetites or urges innate in all of us. So might we finally honor them, appreciating our most aggressive or erotic fantasies, daydreams, and many night dreams, too, as a psychological safety valve. The, to me, unsatisfactory alternative is to view them shamefully, as depicting a part of us so abhorrent that it must be hidden from others, and if possible, from ourselves as well. Many psychology researchers have written about the practical utility of daydreams, for, as already suggested, they can function positively as a much-needed outlet for our frustrations, enabling us to give at least covert expression to impulses and inclinations we know would be foolhardy or hazardous to act out. And so our simply entertaining such fantasies doesn't really reflect any disastrous potential that must thereby be viewed as dark or depraved. The reason that horror movies are perennially popular, especially among the young, is that they too enable us to experience a safe release from or vicarious expression of our most primitive antisocial instincts. And the same is true for many TV shows like Dexter. We are, finally, all animals. And what helps us to transcend the raw instincts of our more primitive, less evolved ancestors is that in our highly developed interest in pro-social behavior, almost all of us freely consent to forego id-related pleasures, the pursuit of which we realize would hurt others and almost certainly come back to haunt us. For both inner and outer balance, we have a fundamental need to express, however indirectly, our whole being. And we hardly need deny our forbidden thoughts, for they're only a relatively small segment of what's naturally inside us. Fully accepting our basic humanity actually necessitates that we acknowledge and make peace with our so-called dark side, which finally is far less dark when we see it for what it is. As Carl Jung said, everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. Moreover, Jung believed that, in spite of its function as a reservoir for human darkness, or perhaps because of this, the shadow is the seat of creativity. And it makes perfect sense that if creativity entails a certain freedom from our customary constraints in thought and feeling, then giving ourselves the license to create also involves granting ourselves the privilege to inwardly explore and outwardly express the darker side of our latent tendencies and impulses. It may well be that what makes a work of art great in the first place is its universality. And what makes it universal is that it addresses so much of what resides deep inside us. the unprincipled and ignominious, as well as the wholesome, praiseworthy, and noble. I'll close with a set of 4 brief quotes. All of them suggest in just a few words much of what I've labored to express in so many more. And the quotes he includes are this: Anthony Hopkins, the actor who made so famous the character of Hannibal Lecter. Hopkins, the actor, said, "I think the healthy way to live is to make friends with the beast inside oneself. And that means not the beast, but the shadow, the dark side of one's nature. So have fun with it and accept everything about yourself." Self-help author John Bradshaw said this: "Evil is a source of moral intelligence in the sense that we need to learn from our shadow, from our dark side, in order to be good." Sue Grafton, who is the author of so many detective novels, wrote this. She said, "We all need to look into the dark side of our nature. That's where the energy is, the passion. People are afraid of that because it holds pieces of us we are busy denying." And the article finishes with a quote from film and stage actor Cheryl Lee, who said this: "The more we deny that we have a dark side, the more power it has over us." I have calls with callers who apparently have a dark side lurking just beneath the skin. And let's find out what they have to say after this. I am about 2.5 weeks out from speaking in Orlando, Florida. That's going to be March 17th. I've also got a whole bunch of dates of not just my speaking events, but conventions, American Atheist and Freedom from Religion Foundation, Secular Student Alliance. Anyway, all of these events, Los Angeles, Little Rock, Kansas City, St. Louis, Denver, and more. Just scroll and find a city near you, thethinkingatheist.com/events. We continue talking about our dark side, the uncivilized primate lurking just beneath the skin of the civilized primate. 317, is it Josh? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
What do you think about this?
My father was put on drugs when he was a baby, and when he met my mother, he overdosed a lot, was taken to a hospital, was taken off the drugs. But because he had such a history with drugs, he hallucinated an angel and thought God was talking to him. And so with this newfound faith, he then indoctrinated all of my siblings, which are 5 of us, into his faith. And when I was a kid growing up, I was never taught critical thinking. I was never taught like who I am truly. When I was about 11, my parents, both heavy evangelicals, my world was that house. My world was that perception of what my father taught us. And so I never knew anything outside of it. And we were homeschooled, living in the country. And so as a kid growing up, I thought that getting beat with a Mighty Might attachment was normal. I thought when my dad would use a pig whip on us, that was normal. I thought when he screamed and yelled and did terrible things, that was normal because that was my world. But as I got older, it was harder and harder for him to keep that world together. And eventually I started asking questions, and he started putting me under more dogma, making me feel bad, trying to destroy my sense of self, trying to put me back under that perception of what he wants me to be. He stopped schooling me and my twin brother because, according to my parents, what would you do with an education? When I was about 25 or 26, that's when the brainwashing pretty much totally broke. I was suicidal, and I didn't know myself. I remember when I was leaving the house, I went up to the train tracks and started crying because I had no education. I didn't even know how to fill out a check. I realized that I didn't matter. They were just using the Bible in order to abuse all my siblings and me, and they just didn't care.
Do you ever find yourself having dark thoughts about all of this?
Well, the way that I've gotten over dark thoughts, especially in the early days of this, was pretty much trying to gain as much knowledge as humanly possible. My thing is trying to use logic and reason and trying to learn who my father really is and my mother. It's what kept the bad thoughts away. I mean, with what you said, you wanted to take that guy who was a dick to you and throw him out a window. Yeah, I've had those thoughts. I think everybody at some point has had those thoughts. When it comes to fantasizing and having a dark side, now that I can think critically and logically, oh, hell yeah. There's many times I wanted to go over to their house, kick the door in, run up to this guy, and just pick him off the ground and make him realize, oh, shit, he's going to kick my ass. But the thing is, I think I've come to the point now where I don't even feel sorry anymore. I just look at him and I'm like, what hell did you go through to make you into such a lunatic?
That's actually an important point. Many of the abusers have been abused. Many of the victimizers are in some ways victims. It sounds like that we're excusing the behavior. The fact that you have that perspective is what's a sign of, I think, real maturity. So thank you for being a part of the conversation. This is actually a little more sort of sobering than I had started. I feel like, I hope I'm doing your call justice after I do a whole, 20-minute rant full of, I'm cracking jokes about crime scenes, but.
No, you're good.
Josh, breathe the free air, my friend. And thanks for being a part of today's broadcast. It's been great talking with you.
You too, sir.
All right, take care. David at 919. Are you there?
Hi, Seth. Dark side. I definitely have one. Never had a hard life. I grew up in a not very rich household at all. My father was a Baptist minister in the North, American Baptist. So wealth was the only privilege I wasn't born with, and haven't had any major blows in my life. I'm 68 almost, and a couple of medical things, but nothing really big. So no life experience to make me have dark thoughts, especially towards myself. But I have them. I'm a huge fan of Dexter. And, I watch that show and I think of how I might want to dispose of somebody so I couldn't get caught. And there's a certain public figure whom I would love to see a particular brand of great harm come to. And I won't go into details.
Let me stop you there for a second, because I think you and I might be in the zip code, but I try to frame it like this. I would never want external harm to come. But if they had a sudden aneurysm, I would not be all that grieved. Is that a terrible thing to say?
I wish you could see me nodding. And yes, that's exactly where I'm at. And I'd wish a certain particular outcomes of that said aneurysm.
Yeah, that's a dark thing to say, I know.
So, and like we have someone down the street from me who flew a Trump flag constantly. Now I live in Virginia. Now he flies underneath the American flag. He's got a Yunkin flag. And I drive past that and I think of like parking in the high school parking lot across from that during school with binoculars to check out the flagpole, and then coming by at night and parking around the corner dressed all in black. And I'm going to cut that frickin' Yunkin flag down. And it's just I think it's a healthy release, assuming you don't act on it, of course. But just entertaining these thoughts is sort of the same as watching the true crime shows and things like that.
Thanks for calling and thanks for the kind words. Hang in there, okay?
I appreciate you so very much.
Thanks, man. Take care.
Bye.
Jenny at 209. Thanks for waiting. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Recently, I've been holding back my dark side, but I've come to a conclusion that with all these attacks on women's health care, and now they're going after IVF, which that is the only way I got one of my grandsons, it makes me so angry. These people don't even have a medical degree, and they make decisions on women. So now, I try to channel it. It's like, should we start protesting churches? Should we do stuff? No, I think we need to start a movement to take away their tax-free exemption.
Jenny, let me give some quick context to people who aren't in the know, especially that we have an international audience. The Alabama Supreme Court just ruled that frozen embryos are human beings. And if anyone destroys an embryo, that's essentially murder, a kind of murder. And now there are organizations who are shutting down their in vitro fertilization programs because, essentially they don't want to be prosecuted for murder. And there are all these other things going on. The couples who are going through IVF treatments are horrified. It is just traumatizing and an assault on human rights. And it's just stupid. I saw somebody and they showed they had a dozen eggs in the passenger seat of their car. And they said, now I'm going to drive in the HOV lane because now I have 13 people in the car, according to the Alabama Supreme Court. And you're right. They don't have medical degrees. They're spouting the name of God every 10 seconds. Zealots, the Christian nationalists, they are using zealotry and ideology to make law, and they're forcing their limited value system down everybody else's throats. And it makes us enraged. And I think your anger is absolutely understandable, Jenny.
Yeah, I mean, I listen to people all the time, and older people who are really heartbroken that their kids aren't even going to give them grandchildren because of the way the situations are going. They don't feel safe, and I don't blame them. My two daughters went through a pregnancy during COVID, and one had to do IVF, and she went through so much to have my grandson that, I was just heart-wrenching to me because I couldn't be so close to her and everything. But I do, at one point my girls had said maybe we're not going to have kids, and I couldn't hold it against them. But I do know more and more women are deciding either to have their tubes tied or whatever because they don't want to be put in bad situations and looked on as a second-class citizen.
Doesn't the dark part of us occasionally admit to saying, wouldn't it be nice to take all of the Alabama Supreme Court who voted for this and put them in a van and drive them to an island surrounded by sharks and alligators and radio. I don't know, just an island that they cannot leave. And, give them basic necessities. And then the rest of us go and evolve society. You go over here and you be small and restrictive and paranoid and fearful and controlling. Have a nice day. You guys ruin each other's lives. We're going to go over here and evolve as a species. I do fantasize about that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the Supreme Court judges down there talks about how there's some sort of 7-pillar Christian thing that they're trying to rule all parts of government. And I'm like, are you freaking kidding me?
What happens in Alabama is really a reflection of what's happening in Bible Belt states, key parts of the United States. They don't just want to do this in one part of the country. They have a mission to overtake the culture. They want Gilead. Your anger is understandable. And I think it's understandable if you and I occasionally go back into our dark closet and say, what if something happened to those guys and we didn't have to worry about them anymore? We don't want harm to come to them. I'm just saying, if the aliens came, if you're going to probe anybody, can you probe the people on the Alabama Supreme Court and keep them all night? They don't have to be anywhere. I'm just saying, Jenny. Thanks for calling this show and hang in there, okay?
Okay.
All right, see you later. She is referring to what's called the 7 Mountains Mandate. There are 7 aspects of society that hardline Christianity wants to overtake: family, religion, education, media, entertainment, business, and government. If you conquer all 7 of those mandates, you have conquered the culture. And that is what is being invoked at the level of the Alabama Supreme Court. So I'm going to quickly try to squeeze in 2 more. 801. Is it Mark? What do you have?
I'm an AI optimist, but I naively hold to the idea that the solution to evil AI is more AI. However, this new creature, AI, is watching us. And the training data that it's getting is not necessarily showing humanity in the most flattering way. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways that AI could be good, but there are so many ways that it could go bad. So I've kind of come to the conclusion that it may start looking at the rotten things we do and come to a conclusion that that's how we prefer to be treated.
So are we talking Skynet here?
Oh, I think it's far worse than that. You know, some cultures, they have demons in their mythology called thought form, where literally the demon itself is an incantation, is a result of an incantation or the imagination of the sorcerer or the whoever. And I think that's kind of what we're making.
This is an interesting angle. So let's say that artificial intelligence becomes sentient. It is conscious. It is a conscious mind. And it sees the darkness that infects the human race and the horrible things we do to each other, right? The inhumanity of humanity. And even if it thinks it's acting in a benevolent way, it's saying, oh, they must really like that. And then it begins to build societal models based on darkness, pain, and cruelty.
You've caught my hypothesis exactly spot on.
That's freaking scary. They're like, look how many people murder each other. They must love murder.
Well, AI, I mean, there are lots of different flavors of AI, but generally speaking, AI is optimized for certain objectives. And if it comes to the conclusion, and see, we have some guardrails that we put up, but more and more, as its cognitive powers become super intelligent, which is soon, frighteningly soon, it's going to come up with its own moral imperative that human beings scarcely have the capacity to even begin to understand, even conceptually, let alone practically.
Well, let me ask you this. The vast majority of us do not act in antisocial ways. We are pro-social creatures. So I believe there is more kindness, right? There is more benevolence. There's more charity. There's more good. And so wouldn't an artificial consciousness see that and then weigh its actions based on how much good and how much evil there is in our society?
Well, I think the word if is doing a whole lot of heavy lifting. I can't help, when I think about this scenario, I can't help but think about the old Santa Claus is coming to town lyric. It sees you when you're sleeping. It sees you when you're awake. It knows if you've been bad or good, so be good for goodness sake. And I think that's important to remember because it is watching us. And being good and benevolent to one another might not just be a good thing to do in and of itself, but it might be a survival strategy for us as humans.
Interesting. I spoke to Professor Nita Farahani, who is an expert in AI and is a big proponent of cognitive liberty. As more and more in the Neuralink age, people are talking about how what's happening under the skull can be scanned and read, at least to a degree. What if AI could see our dark sides, the stuff we don't show everybody, and somehow measure that and think, oh, they enjoy that. They got an endorphin rush from Seth fantasizing about throwing his evil boss through the window. Maybe we'll weigh society in that way. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's horrifying, Mark. Thanks for that. Thanks. Hey, I have a question quickly, and since you're an AI guy, I don't want to sound like the guy resistant to new technologies. I don't want to be the person who's like, well, these kids today, and back when I was a kid.
I know you're just a Luddite as the next generation.
I know. I had someone call me a Luddite the other day, and I'm like, no. I think raising legitimate concerns about new technologies that may start thinking for themselves. And more than that, I'm a little bit nervous about the replacing of human creators. I love the idea of technology lightening the service load of humanity, right. A lot of the menial load. I making our lives easier and less laborious in that way. I like the idea of tools for creation, human creation. What's starting to bother me is this idea that people now who are painters and who are animators and they make art and music and all these things, they are now in competition with machines or software that can do it for nothing sometimes, meaning that they've lost their livelihood or in some ways might be replaced by the machines. I don't think that's hyperbole, and it kind of grieves me. I'm working on a project right now, Mark. I'm trying to do a visualized version of the story of us, the story of you. And so I'm using images of the universe, and there were supernovas and the Big Bang and planet Earth and whatnot. And for a half a second, I thought, wow, I could use AI images for this, and I could probably do it pretty cheaply. And then I thought about all of the people who create these animations and shoot these videos of the night sky and the faces and the breeze and the close-ups of the eyes. You know, they lit the scene and framed the camera and they put it together. And I think I'm replacing them. What does that do to their lives? What statement am I making about humanity if I rest so much on the machines for the creative part of expression? That grieves me. Do you have an opinion, Mark? Am I wrong there?
I do, both academic and real. I'm a first-time novelist, and I will not plug my own book. But I realized during the editing process and when I was having it converted to an audiobook that I likely would be one of the last human authors ever, which is little consolation to the reality that authors and musicians and entertainers and surgeons and CPAs and the list goes on, are being replaced by a machine. And that you're right, it isn't hyperbole, it's absolutely real. And it's happening in front of our very eyes, and it's happening across all domains, all of it.
Mark, when I was in video as a video producer, and back then we would spend, $10,000 for an HD video camera. Oh, it's a big deal. It shoots 1080p. Wow. And it was a lot of money. And now you can shoot 4K or higher on a cell phone, and everybody's got one. So the industry changed. And we saw a lot of video houses close, and everybody had to adapt. I think that's different. Technology evolves. We as a society have to evolve with it. I think the creation of thinking machines that might replace the creator, the human creator, I think that's a different conversation. That doesn't make us Luddites, does it, Mark?
No, Seth, this creature is trespassing on what has normally been a very selfish realm of humanity, our ability to think, our ability to create. Is there anything more, I'm really kind of at a loss for words because I can't think of an allegory that's worse than the reality.
I don't know. There are some I've seen who are like, well, it's going to happen anyway, so let's find a way to go with it. What's that line? I'd rather be a pet than cattle. If it's going to take over, at least I'm going to be involved in the process some way. But I feel like at some point, don't we as a society, as a species, consciously say, we're going to partition this out, as flawed as it is, and sometimes as slow and imperfect as it is. But this is a human thing, where humans do this, and the machines will do that. I don't think it's ever going to happen, but I am watching closely. And if AI can ever read the human dark side and interprets that dark side in the wrong way, then maybe it is Skynet or worse. I don't know. Build a bunker. Let's build a bunker, Mark.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Seth.
Appreciate you, man. Hang in there. We may have to do a whole broadcast on AI. I think most people have an opinion, and they're polarized opinions. I've talked to some people who were like, it is what it is. You're just resisting change. You sound like your parents. And there are other people who are saying, this is foreign territory. The technology is developing faster than our development of the understanding of the consequences. We got to slow down. I think that's the message. Everybody just slow down. Just because we can do it doesn't mean we should, because it becomes exponential. Maybe that's a whole show. Would you welcome a show like that? Would you want to have those discussions in depth? 404, you've been so patient. Thanks for waiting. What's your name?
Bernard.
We're talking about the dark side. What do you have for us?
Okay, well, I was thinking about the classic episode of Star Trek where Kirk, the transporter being split him in two. And one was the very kind, civil, but weak and indecisive. He was very indecisive, Kirk. And the other was strong and very sexual and very animalistic. And Spock had to explain to him, that's inside of you. It's part of what makes you such a magnificent starship captain. Without that, you are not Kirk. So it is in us. It's what Mark Twain says, that most of us are like the shining bright moon, in the darkest night, but each of us has a dark side that few should ever see. And my uncle said that coming back from war, he learned that you could cradle a child and embrace a woman and also kill a man to defend them. So that part is in us. It's part of the reason why the book Jeckyll and Hyde was written, because he was fascinated how each human has both of those in us. It's in us. And one, as Kirk discovered, one controls the other. But without that, we're not who we think we are. We're something altogether different. It's in you. It's part of what makes you such a magnificent starship captain. But it's this side of you that controls that side of you. The nice Kirk was indecisive. He was weak. He couldn't leave. And he said, no, we've got to find a way to put you back together again so that you can be the Kirk that is this magnificent commander.
I will say that evil Spock was a badass. Evil Spock with the goatee. He was just a badass.
He was a badass.
Badass. Bernard, you're awesome. Thanks for capping the show. And hang in there, okay?
Thank you, sir.
All right, see you later.
I want to tell you the other day, I don't know if you got the picture, but I saw a man at the gas pump a few days ago, and he could be your brother. I mean, I said, you need to behave yourself because you have a doppelganger.
There's somebody out there that looks like me.
I don't want anyone to mistake. I don't want him to be mistaken for you. So wow. You behave yourself.
All right. Thanks, man.
I'll send you the picture.
Send me the picture.
I'll send you the picture via Facebook.
All right. Appreciate you, brother. That's scary. There's somebody out there, some poor sap looks like me. I am so very sorry. I don't think my parents have anything to tell me. Speaking of Dexter, I fantasized about consequences for the people who wrote season 8 and the series finale of Dexter, because I think there might have to be consequences. I just had to throw that out there as we finish our conversation today about the dark side. I appreciate you listening. Thanks for putting up with your host. I'll see you back here next time.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter for a complete archive of podcasts and videos, products like mugs and t-shirts featuring the Thinking Atheist logo, links to atheist pages and resources, and details on upcoming free thought events and conventions. Log on to our website, thethinkingatheist.com.